Imagine kneeling on damp wood, the scent of blood still hanging in the air from the last poor soul. A masked man stands over you, his axe glinting in the grey light. You close your eyes and pray for a quick end. But this is Henry VIII's England, and mercy is a myth. The blade swings, it misses, you scream, so does the crowd. Under Henry, death was not justice. It was a message, and the message was terror. This wasn't the rule of a monarch, it was the theatre of a tyrant, where bodies were broken not just to punish, but to perform. Heads rolled, flesh boiled, men were torn apart like meat, and women, some burned until they were nothing but ash and royal scandal. Today we dig into the twisted toolbox of King Henry VIII, the execution methods he used to rule by fear, and the unlucky souls who met them face to face. This is not history for the faint-hearted. This is the raw truth buried beneath the crown. The bloody reign. To understand why Henry's executions were so gruesome, you need to understand the man himself. When Henry VIII inherited the throne in 1509, he was young, charismatic, and obsessed with power. But over the decades, that charm soured. A festering leg wound, failed marriages, and a desperate need for a male heir twisted him into something else. A paranoid, unpredictable tyrant who saw betrayal in every shadow. As he grew more unstable, so did his punishments. He expanded the definition of treason until it meant almost anything. Speaking against the king, doubting his marriages, refusing to accept his new religion. Even dreams could be considered dangerous. The result, a kingdom where anyone, noble, commoner, friend or wife, could be accused, imprisoned and executed with no warning. And the methods weren't just brutal, they were chosen for effect, for fear. Henry didn't just want enemies gone, he wanted them humiliated, reduced, erased. The Tower of London, once a fortress, became a slaughterhouse for traitors. Execution sites like Tyburn Tree and Smithfield were turned into blood-stained stages. But Henry didn't swing the axe himself. He used a legal machine, judges, torturers and spies, to grind his enemies into meat while keeping his velvet hands clean. Some of his methods were old, others were invented just for him. But every one of them told the people of England the same thing: obey or die screaming. Now, let's look at how he made sure they listened. Beheading, the clean kill that wasn't. Beheading was supposed to be the merciful way to die. A single swing, quick, noble, painless. But under Henry VIII, even this clean kill could turn into a bloodbath. Beheading wasn't just punishment, it was performance. And if the king wanted to make a statement, you'd be lucky to keep your dignity, never mind your head. Case 1, Anne Boleyn, beheaded for being inconvenient. Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, was once the queen who changed England forever. She helped bring down the Catholic Church's grip on the throne. She gave him a daughter, Elizabeth, but no son. And in Henry's mind, that was treason enough. In 1536, he had her arrested on charges of adultery, incest and conspiracy, almost certainly fabricated. Her trial was a farce. Her sentence was death. But Henry, in a twisted act of mercy, imported a French swordsman to do the deed. The sword was supposed to be more precise than an axe, cleaner, more respectful. What actually happened? Anne knelt on the scaffold, her eyes covered. The executioner distracted her with small talk, then crept behind her, sword drawn. With one swing, her head hit the straw. It was quick. But the real horror wasn't how she died. It was that the crowd watched a queen publicly murdered by her husband and cheered. Case 2, Thomas More, killed by conscience. Sir Thomas More, Henry's former Lord Chancellor, was executed in 1535. His crime? Refusing to acknowledge Henry as supreme head of the Church of England. He was led to Tower Hill, calm, composed, even made a joke on the scaffold. I pray you, see me safe up, and for my coming down, let me shift for myself. But when the axe fell, it took more than one blow. The executioner hesitated, missed, struck bone. More's blood soaked the block while the crowd watched in silence. This wasn't mercy, this was humiliation. The message? Even the king's closest friends are disposable. The myth of the one-swing kill. Executioners were often drunk, inexperienced, or simply careless. Nobles could bribe for better treatment. A sharp blade, a skilled hand. But many couldn't. In some cases, it took 3, 4, even 5 swings to separate head from body. The screams of the dying mingled with the roar of the crowd. It wasn't just pain, it was spectacle. And once the head was off, it was raised to the crowd. Sometimes spiked on London Bridge, a final insult in Henry's England, beheading was meant to be honourable. But in truth, it was the most elegant form of butchery. Burning at the stake, heresy, fire and screams. Fire doesn't just kill, it transforms. Under Henry VIII, burning at the stake became the punishment for heretics, those who dared to defy the new religious order. Whether you worshipped the Pope or read the Bible in English, it didn't matter. If you crossed Henry's ever-shifting religious lines, you could find yourself tied to a stake, soaked in oil, waiting for the flames to find your flesh. Anne Askew, tortured then burned. Anne Askew was young, educated, and unrepentant. She was a Protestant in a time when Protestantism had once been royal policy, but not anymore. Henry had veered back toward Catholicism, and Anne's refusal to recant her beliefs was seen as rebellion. First, they tortured her on the rack, a rare punishment for a noblewoman. They ripped her joints out of socket so severely that she had to be carried to the stake on a chair. Even then, she refused to betray others or renounce her faith. On July 16, 1546, she was burned alive at Smithfield. Eyewitnesses said she remained calm as the flames climbed her body, the crowd screaming louder than she did. They tried to make her an example. Instead, she became a martyr. Margaret Cheney, burned for witchcraft. While officially condemned for heresy, many women accused during Henry's reign were also suspected of witchcraft. Margaret Cheney was one of them. A healer, a midwife, and a woman who didn't keep quiet. The perfect mix for suspicion. She was tied to the stake, her body wrapped in chains to keep her from leaping out of the fire. It wasn't quick. First, the heat blackens your skin, then your eyeballs burst, then your lungs fill with smoke before the flames finally eat your throat. She didn't scream after the first few minutes. Her vocal cords had already burned away. The crowd's role in the horror. These weren't private executions. They were public theatre. Vendors sold food. Children watched. People laughed or prayed as the fire lit up the sky. Some believed it was holy justice. Others just came for the smell of burning flesh. Executioners sometimes used wet wood to prolong the agony. A dry fire would kill quickly. A wet one, it smoked, smoldered, let the victim cook slowly, piece by piece. It wasn't just death, it was ritualized horror. Religious shifts equals moving goalposts. The worst part, Henry's religious laws changed constantly. You could be burned for denying the Pope 1 year, and the next you'd be executed for supporting him. People lived in constant fear, not of God, but of Henry's whims. In Henry's England, your soul didn't belong to God, it belonged to the crown, and if it didn't behave, the fire would cleanse it for you. Hanging, drawing, and quartering, death by dissection. If beheading was for nobles and burning was for heretics, then hanging, drawing, and quartering was for the king's most hated enemies. It was the ultimate punishment for treason, and it wasn't just about killing you, it was about breaking you, slowly, publicly, in pieces. What it really involved, this was not one act. It was a ritual of pain, first hanging, but not until death. You were suspended just long enough to choke, not die. Then drawing, dragged through the streets tied to a horse, your body scraping across cobblestone before reaching the scaffold, finally quartering, your belly slit open, your entrails pulled out and burned while you were still alive, your genitals hacked off, your heart ripped from your chest. Then finally, your body was chopped into 4 parts, your head boiled, and all of it was displayed on spikes across the kingdom. The goal? Terror by anatomy. Case study: the Pilgrimage of Grace rebels. In 1536, tens of thousands of northern English subjects rose up in protest. They called it the Pilgrimage of Grace, demanding that Henry stop dissolving the monasteries. Henry pretended to negotiate. Then he rounded up the leaders, like Robert Aske, a former lawyer, and gave them the full traitor's death. Aske was dragged from his cell and hanged in chains over the walls of York, left to rot for weeks as a warning. Others were drawn, gutted, and quartered in towns where they once held influence. One monk, accused of simply housing a rebel, was tied to a hurdle and dragged miles in winter, his face frozen, legs broken, and then gutted alive while children were made to watch. Why so much pain? Because treason, in Henry's eyes, wasn't just rebellion. It was blasphemy against God's chosen ruler. Every slice, burn, and tear sent a message. Defy me and I'll rip the loyalty from your body. Even after death, the punishment continued. Heads were mounted on spikes over London Bridge, rotting in the sun, dripping on passers-by. Limbs were nailed to city gates, roads, and churches. In 1 year alone, over 200 bodies were displayed across England like grotesque billboards of loyalty. You didn't just die under Henry, you were erased, dismembered, scattered, so that no one, not even God, could piece you back together. Boiling alive, the king's custom-made death. Some deaths are ancient, others are born from rage. Boiling alive was not a standard punishment in England. It wasn't common, it wasn't traditional. It was invented by Henry VIII, and once he wrote it into law, the water started to bubble. The case of Richard Rose, boiled like meat. In 1531, a humble cook named Richard Rose was accused of poisoning porridge at the Bishop of Rochester's home. 2 people died. The bishop himself survived. Normally, Rose would have been hanged, but Henry was furious. Poison, he believed, was cowardly, the work of a traitor without a sword. And worse, it happened in a bishop's kitchen, right in the belly of the church. So the king did something chilling. He passed a new law on the spot. Anyone who kills by poison shall be boiled to death. No trial, no mercy. Days later, Rose was thrown into a cauldron of scalding water at Smithfield Market. Eyewitnesses said his screams lasted 15 minutes. His skin peeled off in sheets. His body thrashed, rising and sinking in the frothing water like meat in a stew. When it was over, the crowd wasn't cheering. They were silent. A law written in blood. The act was officially called the Act for Poisoning. It applied only to poisoners, and it made boiling a legal punishment, on par with hanging or beheading. But it wasn't only about justice, it was a warning. I, the king, can change the law at any time, and you will obey it, or suffer in silence. The law remained on the books for 16 years. Was Richard Rose even guilty? Modern historians question the evidence. Rose may have been a scapegoat, no motive, no history of crime, and the bishop survived. But that didn't matter. Henry needed a monster, so he made one. And then he boiled him alive in front of a cheering crowd. The method behind the madness. Boiling wasn't just hot, it was slow. Victims were often dunked feet first into giant pots. The heat would rise gradually, cooking nerves, muscle, and finally organs. Some were bound inside metal cages. Others had limbs held down with iron poles to stop them escaping the liquid death. If they fainted, they were revived. The suffering had to be complete. Henry's enemies weren't executed. They were reduced from person to broth. The scavenger's daughter and Tudor torture devices crushed without a drop of blood. Not every death under Henry came with fire or steel. Some were quieter, slower, designed not to end life, but to shatter it piece by piece. These weren't executions, they were invitations to madness. The scavenger's daughter, a reverse rack. Everyone knows the rack. a device that stretches the body until tendons snap and bones dislocate. But Henry's Tower of London had a lesser-known sibling, a cruel, quiet monster. The scavenger's daughter, a device shaped like an iron A. The victim was folded forward, head down, knees up, body compressed until the ribs cracked. Blood oozed from ears, nose, eyes, and internal organs began to rupture. There was no screaming, just weeping blood. It was created by Lieutenant Skevington, whose name twisted into scavenger over time. Some historians say it was used to make prisoners confess. Others say it was used just to watch them break. The manacles, the weight of silence manacles, simple iron cuffs. But in Henry's Tower, they weren't for restraint. They were for suspension. Prisoners were hung from their wrists for hours, sometimes days. The weight of their own body tore their shoulders out of socket, fingers blackened, blood vessels burst, arms paralyzed. Few died from it, but many wished they had. Iron gauntlets, thumbscrews, and the little E's. Henry's torturers didn't stop at the obvious. Thumbscrews crushed bones slowly, used especially on suspected conspirators. Iron gauntlets were heated red hot, then clamped around the forearms of prisoners. And then there was the little E's, a cell so small you couldn't sit, stand, or lie down. You just crouched, in the dark, alone, for days. Your body gave out, then your mind followed. Torture was officially illegal, but frequently used English law technically banned torture. But Henry didn't care. He granted special permission for certain urgent interrogations, especially those involving plots, heresy, or treason. His men didn't need proof. They needed confessions, and if they couldn't get one, they squeezed harder. Mind games in the Tower. Many prisoners were tortured not by steel, but by time, isolation, noise, rotting food, watching others die. Some were locked up for years, waiting for a trial that never came, waiting for a knock on the door that meant death. Others, like Thomas Cromwell, once Henry's closest advisor, were dragged straight from favour to the block. One day, you were in the king's inner circle. The next, you were bleeding from the eyes, folded in steel. Henry didn't just kill traitors, he turned their minds into cages first. And if the body broke before the soul, all the better. Starvation, isolation, and psychological torture, the slow deaths of the Tower. Not all of Henry's victims screamed. Some simply vanished. No blood, no fire, just a slow descent into silence, madness, and decay. Because in Henry's Tower of London, death didn't always come with a sword. Sometimes it came one rotten breath at a time. The Tower of London. Prison, tomb, and theatre. The Tower wasn't just a prison. It was a symbol, a gilded coffin in the heart of the kingdom. Stone walls 20 feet thick, guards at every turn. No light, no warmth, no escape. Prisoners weren't always executed. Some were simply left, abandoned in damp cells, fed just enough to keep their hearts beating, but never enough to think clearly. They weren't punished. They were forgotten. Marginal figures, maximum suffering. There are no monuments to the forgotten victims, only fragments of their stories. A young priest accused of sedition was locked in a room beneath the White Tower. When they found him 6 weeks later, he was chewing on his own fingers. An elderly noblewoman who once attended Queen Catherine was imprisoned in a cell with no bedding, no light, and no bucket. She died naked, soaked in her own waste, bones showing through her skin. A former friend of Henry's, accused of minor betrayal, was fed nothing but bread and water for 4 months. When he was finally executed, he weighed less than 90 pounds. Psychological games and deliberate cruelty torture didn't always involve devices. Sometimes it was routine turned poison. Guards changing at random hours to destroy your sense of time. Food tainted with lye or maggots. Whispers through the walls, real or imagined. The sound of executions outside your window. being moved from cell to cell, always at night. And worst of all, you were kept alive long enough to know what was coming. Some were told their executions were imminent. Every day for weeks, the scaffold would be prepared, the axe polished, then nothing. Until the next day, and the next, and the next. The Tower's most damaged prisoners were released. Some prisoners, especially nobles, were never executed. They were held for years, and then released. But they didn't go free. They went insane. One man returned home after 4 years in solitary and never spoke again. Another was seen eating insects in the street, believing he was still imprisoned. A former lady-in-waiting was caught scratching messages into her skin with a pin, whispering names of people long dead. These were the survivors, the ones who were supposed to be lucky. Some kings punish you for disobedience. Henry punished you for disloyalty. But the worst fate wasn't to be executed. It was to be remembered by him and left to rot. The king's message: fear as a weapon. Henry VIII didn't need to execute thousands. He just needed to execute loudly. His violence wasn't hidden. It was designed to be seen. Executions weren't justice. They were propaganda. The performance of power. Every death was a ritual, a message to the kingdom. Beheadings were held on Tower Green or public squares. Burnings lit up marketplaces like sermons in fire. Dismembered traitors were nailed to gates and bridges. Even boiling took place before jeering crowds. These weren't punishments, they were lessons. A spectacle of pain that said, I am the king, I decide what truth is, I decide what is holy, I decide whether you live or rot. And the people? They didn't resist, they watched. The power of word-of-mouth horror. Many executions were attended by hundreds, some by thousands, but millions heard about them. Rumors spread faster than official proclamations. Children repeated the names of burned heretics like ghost stories. Traders told tales of the man who screamed as his belly was opened. Heads on spikes became national landmarks. Henry didn't need a printing press. He had the human mouth, and fear multiplies with every retelling. Obedience by design. Henry didn't want love, he wanted control, so he ruled by contradiction. Marry Anne, kill Anne, burn Catholics, then burn Protestants. Say one thing, punish you for believing it. The result? A nation too confused to resist, too scared to speak, too traumatized to fight back. When everyone's afraid of saying the wrong thing, no one says anything at all. Who would be next? Henry's methods worked because they were unpredictable. Today's favorite could be tomorrow's traitor. Even queens weren't safe. Even his own children lived in fear. And for those watching, the message was clear. If I can burn her, I can burn you. Henry didn't need an army to rule. He had something far more effective. The sound of an axe, the crackle of fire, the silence of a cell, and the knowledge that no one, not even God, could save you. The legacy of fear, Henry's violence after death. When Henry VIII died in 1547, England didn't rejoice. It didn't mourn either. It held its breath, because the monster was gone. But the fear was still alive. His children were raised in blood. Henry left behind 3 heirs, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. All would wear the crown. All would rule in the shadow of his violence. Edward IV was a child, a puppet for Protestant reformers who used Henry's brutal tactics to silence Catholic dissent. Mary I, Henry's daughter with Catherine of Aragon, reversed course, burning Protestants alive in numbers that shocked the kingdom. She earned a new name, Bloody Mary. Elizabeth I, Anne Boleyn's daughter, inherited not just the throne, but the trauma. Her reign was shaped by paranoia, secret plots, executions, and the same cold precision her father perfected. Henry didn't just leave behind a blood-stained legacy. He left behind a blueprint. He was buried like a king and rotted like a man. Henry was buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, in the same vault as Jane Seymour, his favorite wife. But the king who ruled by spectacle died in silence and decay. His body had swelled grotesquely. The stench was overwhelming. According to witnesses, his coffin burst open during transport, spilling black fluid onto the floor. Some said dogs licked the remains, a fitting end for a man who left nothing unspoiled. England couldn't forget him, even when it tried. Even centuries later, Henry remained a symbol of power and of nightmare. His Tower of London still stands, now a tourist site, once a death trap. His laws shaped British justice for generations. His faces, the handsome prince and the bloated tyrant, became icons in art and nightmares. And his methods, still studied, still whispered, still feared. Henry VIII didn't just kill his enemies. He made a kingdom afraid to speak, afraid to think, afraid to breathe the wrong way. His axe may be gone, his fires long cold, but in every dark cell, every blood-soaked square, every story whispered through clenched teeth, Henry still rules. It would mean a lot if you would consider subscribing and would help a small channel like ours grow. We are always trying to improve, so if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments, and they might make the next video. Thanks for watching.